Good afternoon and welcome to the live stream of the State of Yachting 2024. My name is Francesca Webster. I am the Editor-in-Chief of SuperYacht Times and I'm joined this afternoon by Ralph Dazert, the Head of Intelligence at SYTIQ and SuperYacht Times. Over the next 20 minutes, Ralph is going to be giving the highlight synopsis of this year's market report, after which time we will be answering some questions, so please leave some comments on the YouTube page or send them in via our Instagram. The report itself will be available directly after the live stream, so keep an eye on the SuperYacht Times website and the social media for that. So now I hand over to you, Ralph.
Thank you. Thank you for the introduction, Francesca. As mentioned, I am the Head of Intelligence at SuperYacht Times and I'm in charge of our team which is constantly updating our SuperYacht database, which is the force behind the yacht section and the yachts for sale section on superyachttimes.com. But very importantly, we also maintain SYTIQ, which is our market intelligence database that we sell on a subscription basis to industry professionals, and there we have much more extensive information than on the main website. So things like owner information, refit information, sales transactions and so on and so forth. So for those that don't know it, the State of Yachting looks back in data to the past year. So the State of Yachting 2024 looks back at the data of 23, but we also try to take a look ahead at the current year, what we expect. So one of the main things I noticed last year is that the completions of new yachts, so deliveries, are up. And in fact, they were up by 19% to just over 200 yachts over 30 meters, which is the highest that we have seen since 2010, so that's a long time ago. At the same time, new yacht sales were down by a similar percentage, and then you get the funny situation that sales and completions were practically equal, which I at least have never seen before. Now, if you look at this graph, you can see that the blue line, which is the new yacht sales, have come down quite considerably since the peak of 2021. At the same time, the industry has been working very hard to ramp up production to fulfill all those orders that were signed in 21 and 22, and they have succeeded. I would expect for this year also a year with strong completions, also over 200. I've put it at 205 now in the new report. At the same time, I would expect new yacht sales to go down a little bit further. 203, what we saw, was still not bad if you look historically, because before COVID we were more used to 160, 170, 180. And speaking to various people at the Palm Beach Boat Show last week, there is a sense that the market is still slowing down a bit. But I wouldn't expect it to go down too much, as we signed many new customers to the SuperYacht fleet during COVID, and many of those are staying on and moving on to new yachts. So the pool of customers has expanded permanently by a bit, which is very good news for the industry. Now moving on, I tried to also give you a sense of how large this is in monetary terms, and I estimate that the total value of yachts delivered in 2023, those 200 plus, is close to 6 billion euros. Now, what do all these completions mean for the fleet? And so at the start of this year, we were close to 5,800 yachts in total. That's the line on the top. And that consisted mainly of motor yachts, the black line, over 4,900, and then close to 900 sailing yachts. Now, they've come a long way, because if you look all the way to the left at 1989, we were collectively at just under 1,000 yachts. So in 35 years, the fleet has grown sixfold. And I think by the end of 24, we could be hitting the 6,000 mark in total. So that will be a new milestone then. And just some brief stats about the fleet. So 85% are motor yachts, 15% are sail. When I took over the making of this report in 2019, sail was still good for 16%. So it's very slowly the share of sailing yachts is going down, because the fleet of motor yachts is growing faster than the fleet of sailing yachts. The fleet has gone a little bit younger over the past year due to the influx of so many new yachts. And the average length of a yacht has remained the same. Now, I just mentioned new build sales and that they're slowing down a bit. Let's take a bit of a closer look at that. So what did we see last year in terms of sales? We saw that the bread and butter segment between 30 and 40 meters, that's about 60% of the whole operating fleet, so it's very important. That went down a bit. Sort of the middle category, 40 to 50 and 50 to 60, were relatively stable. But what we do see is that over 60 meters, sales of new yachts took quite a hit. And we think that has to do with high new build prices and long lead times. I mean, for a large yacht over 40 meters, over 80 meters, you can easily be waiting 4 years or more. And of course, we cannot deny also that the departure of the Russians from the scene since 2 years ago has had an impact, as Russians were prone to ordering very extravagant, very large yachts. And the American clients on which the industry for the very large customer yachts relies on for a large part tend to buy slightly smaller vessels. Now, if we look what it means per country, there we see something interesting, that actually Italian sales were up last year, while in all the other countries, sales of new yachts were down. And this is by build country, so it's not where they are sold, but where they are built. And why did the Italian sales go up? I'm not entirely sure, but I think it has to do with the many new models introduced in recent years, expansion of production capacity. The Italians spent a lot of money on getting extra facilities, and just an aggressive sales push as well. Dutch sales, German sales were down quite a bit, as these countries are the powerhouses for large custom yachts, which, as I mentioned before, sales were down there. Meanwhile, Turkey is making a bit of a shift towards larger yachts, so they were impacted. At the same time, they've started a lot of new projects sort of in the 50 to 60 meter range on speculation, which will come up for sale soon, and so I think the numbers will go up again. Taiwan is a country which relies extensively on building on speculation, so that is when the project is started by the shipyard and then sold to a client. And they even go as far as like completing them and then bringing them to their main markets, which traditionally are the United States and Australia, and then selling them there as dealer stock boats. Speaking to representatives of some of these shipyards during Palm Beach, I get the impression that a lot of interesting new boats are coming to the US and Australia from these builders, so we should see sales going up this year for that country. Now, the summary of yachts in build, we call that the construction book. We don't call it the order book, a term you also see, because we take the grand total of yachts in build regardless of whether they are sold or for sale. Now, with completions and sales in balance, you would expect the number to be stationary, but it's not. And that has to do with the fact that some extra speculation new builds were started last year. And the extra number, you can see the difference, is 27 yachts that came about, well, roughly 50-50 from Italy and from Turkey. In Turkey, we have seen quite a few builders from the commercial shipbuilding industry who are having a go at building super yachts. They tend to go for steel yachts in the low 50 meters, below the crucial threshold of 500 gross tons. Above 500 gross tons, a yacht gets a lot more complicated and expensive to operate. So yeah, that's where the growth comes from. And yeah, unfortunately, the little block at the bottom sale got even a bit smaller, as sailing yachts had a year of relatively poor sales, while quite a few were handed over to the owner. At the same time, a lot of revamping of models is going on there at the likes of Wally, Perini Navi. We have the powerhouses of Southern Wind, Swan, Baltic Yachts, constantly introducing new models with many hybrid propulsion features as well. And of course, we shouldn't ignore sort of the elite of the large custom sailing yacht builders in the Netherlands, like Royal Huisman and Vitters, who will also have some very innovative and sustainable projects in build right now. So it ought to go up again. Then moving on to some brief stats about the construction book. Well, it went up, of course, while the average size of the yachts in build is pretty much stationary. Then if we split it up by the sizes, what we see there is that both 40 to 50 and 60 to 80 went up, and over in those categories it's caused by still more yachts having been sold than they were delivered. Between 50 and 60 the story is slightly different. There it's mainly caused by new speculation boats started. Again, that has largely to do with the Turkish startups that I just mentioned. And despite a year of slow sales, the number of yachts in construction over 80 meters has remained stationary. So if we look at countries, there's a couple of different ways to look at it. And the easy one is to look at just number of yachts, and there the Italians are ahead by an enormous margin. But that's not totally fair, because if we would look at the average size of yachts, then the whole ranking gets turned on its head. And suddenly the Germans are leading with an average size of a project there of 99 meters. And the Netherlands also build on average large yachts with an average length of 65 meters, and the rest are more in the high 40s. Now there's even another yardstick to look at, which is gross tonnage, which is a measure of interior volume of a yacht. And there we see it even more spectacular difference, that the average German project is 3 times as large as the average Dutch project. And to put things into perspective, 4,500 gross tons, you're looking at a yacht in the order of, give or take, 110 meters. And 1,400 GT, you're looking more towards 65, 70 meters. Okay, and this is a slide, I actually showed it last year as well, but it's interesting that the development has sustained and even become more pronounced. That is the consolidation of shipyards. So if you look at this graph all the way at the left, in 2009 we had 113 shipyards, 113, delivering 222 yachts, so that's about 2 yachts per yard. Move on 14 years and we have just 65 yards in the game, so 40% less, delivering just over 200 yachts. So that's over 3 yachts per shipyard. And as you can see, deliveries went way up, but the number of from 22 to 23, but the amount of shipyards involved remained the same. So again, further consolidation. And if we then take a look at the last 5 years to sort of see what happened in recent history, the output per shipyard over the last 5 years has been close to 6 yachts. So on average they do a bit over 1 yacht a year, and it's still increasing that output, as you can see. And the top 25 yards take a very large chunk of the deliveries, 70% we counted. When I did the same stats a year ago, it was 72%, so hardly changed. The grip of the top yards on the market is there. Now if you do the same for the yachts in build, well, of course we already saw the number went up. But it is being built by less yards again, so further consolidation. And you see this in the number of yachts in build per yard. That also went slightly up again. So the average shipyard has 4.5 new builds in their order book. Now we've spoken so far about new builds, but the brokerage market, or used yacht market as we prefer to call it, that's a very large aspect of the market. And that took a bit of a hit last year. In the number of yachts sold, it went down by over a quarter, while the number of new listings, that's used yachts coming new to the market, being listed for sale, went up. But I think the best sign of sort of the slowdown of the market is the amount of price changes. And price changes is a bit of a euphemism for price cuts, because the majority of those are reductions. And now it's not just that the number went up quite sharply, as you can see in this graph, it's the blue line is the price changes. It's also the intensity of the cuts. When you look at 2022, there the average price reduction was between 100k, 200k euro. We measure these things per quarter. And in 23, it was between 600k and 800k per cut, so way more. And you have more cuts and bigger cuts. So what does that mean in monetary terms? Well, quite a lot, in fact. We estimate that in 2023, 655 million worth of yacht value was wiped off the market by price reductions, while it was way less in 2022, as you can see. So what is this sign? That sellers are recognizing that to make the deal, they need to work a bit harder. And then the deal can still be made. Because does it mean we had a bad market last year? Not necessarily so. Again, I tried to put a monetary value to what went down. And I came to a total of 4.6 billion worth of yachts over 30 meters, used yachts being sold. But the funny thing is, that is in fact 500 million more than we noted in 2022. So what happened? The yachts sold in 23 were on average 25% larger in gross tonnage, in volume, and the price per gross ton, which is, let's say, the least unfair measure of trying to get to the true price of a yacht, went up by 10%. So you're selling fewer yachts, but much bigger and more expensive. And you can also see this in the sales stats when you divide them by length, because almost everything is down except 60 to 80 and 80 plus. That's where it was happening last year. And why is this? We think it is directly related to the new build market, which was slowing down. Buyers want to get a new yacht quickly, they want to size up, they don't want to wait 4 years, they don't want to wait the current pricing in especially Northern Europe for new builds. So when an attractive used yacht over 60 meters comes on the market, there's really not that many of them. People jump on them. And you can see that sellers are also starting to recognize this, because the amount of new listings between 60 and 80 meters went up quite a bit during 2023, by 40% from 20 in 2022 to 28 in 2023. And they are getting sold as well. So there's a lot happening on the top end of the market for the used yachts. Now I kept this for last. It's always the bit that a lot of people are asking us about. Where do the owners come from? Now, I think you can probably guess a little bit what the largest country is for ownership. No, it's not Russia. It's the United States. We look here at 40 meter plus, so really the big yachts, and their American owners have close to 24% of all yachts. The share is unchanged from last year. However, if you would go behind that and look at the total length of yachts they own, so if you would put them all end to end, or the total volume, those measurements have both grown actually. So they are also owning bigger yachts on average than before, the Americans. Russian share went down for the second year in a row, perhaps not surprising after the sanctions that were installed in 2022. Unable to take delivery of new yachts. A very small number of yachts actually seized and auctions sold. It's a very small number, much smaller than popular media would like to quote. And some yachts regularly sold as well, although that can be a challenge, of course. Turkey and Greece both up slightly, 0.1%, 0.2% compared to last year. But the one to single out here is the United Arab Emirates. That grew across the board, so more yachts owned, total length went up, total gross tonnage went up. And having been there now twice over the last 2 years for our own Gulf SuperYacht Summit, this comes as no surprise to us, and I think that we will see more development over there. And we should not forget the neighbors of the UAE here either, the Saudis, are investing very heavily in superyacht tourism, particularly on the Red Sea coast, and they already have a very prestigious fleet, because the average Saudi yacht is 67 meter in length, which makes them the biggest. UAE not far behind at 63. And Russia still in top despite losing some big ones, but I mean most Russian-owned yachts are still Russian-owned and hiding in various places of the world. The UK and USA, important countries in the mid-50s, while most of the southern European countries are in the high 40-meter range. Now this is all I have time for right now in the scope of today's live stream, and we need to look at your questions, of course, as well. So did you get any, Francesca?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you, obviously, Ralph, and congratulations to you and the whole IQ team for putting together another incredibly thorough market report. We have had a couple of questions. We had one particularly interesting one that came on through Instagram. So you mentioned there the speculation build yachts particularly increasing over the last year, and we'll see that again this year, we expect. But Turkey particularly has come up as a significant player.
Yeah.
What do you think has precipitated this development?
I think that the whole Turkish superyachting industry has been given a tremendous boost. I mean, it was never small, it was always very significant. But we have seen Turkish owners buying more yachts. We have also seen owners from certain countries parking their yachts in Turkey. Those require marinas, refits. So the whole industry has really been given an enormous shot in the arm there. And Turkey is also one of the few places in the superyacht industry where you can still expand capacity relatively easily. It's all relative terms because, of course, Turkey has more skilled craftsmen maybe on standby than we have in Southern or Northern Europe, but still not unlimited. So what we've seen as interesting fact is that a lot of commercial Turkish shipbuilders are taking the plunge into superyacht construction. And commercial builders in Turkey are already quite advanced. They have been building very high-tech ferries, for example, in Northern Europe, running on batteries, running on LNG. They know the ropes. Of course, now it will be interesting to see if they gamble on building these 50 meter, 52, 53 meter steel aluminum yachts, if that will pay out. And but they're really boosting their infrastructure on all sides for the super yachting. So there will be still a country to watch, I think, for the coming years.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've just had a question from the team at Amico. Thank you very much for sending that in. Asking if we have seen any trends or expect any trends in the refit market.
I think still the fleet is growing so fast and faster than before, and all these yachts need servicing. So I think capacity will remain an issue. What we have been seeing, well, Turkey I just mentioned, but also Middle East, several projects afoot, as we also know from our Gulf summits, to build new refit sites there, because there's really not much there right now. And various international refit players engaged in that as well, in those projects. I think other than that, there are a couple of interesting extensive refits going on where, for example, a vintage yacht, it's at one of the Italian yards, is being completely hybridized. It's a vintage yacht from the late 60s, which is undergoing a radical revamp. Obviously, we hope to see more of those. Because the question always on my mind, and I'm happy to speak with them at some point about it, is what are we going to do with all these yachts over 15, 20 years old, which have dated decor, old propulsion setups, and so on and so forth. What are we going to do about that? So, yeah, are we going to retrofit them or just keep them carrying on? I mean, regulations are also getting more stringent. So, yeah, I think plenty of food there, and it has our constant attention, the refit industry. For sure. Absolutely,
and I think it's important to add that although we're having 200 yachts, more than 200 yachts being completed per year, there are 6,000 yachts in the global fleet, and many of those yachts, as Ralph just mentioned, are particularly dated. And we are seeing a trend towards far more open plan interiors, far more close relationship between the water and the interior. So the buyers that are buying today aren't going to be looking for a heavily lacquered interior. They're going to be looking to make it some serious changes. And as Ralph mentioned, in the last 2 years, we've seen some very radical refits. So I don't think the refit sector is going anywhere. And if anything, it's only going to be growing in popularity and importance for our industry.
Yeah, there's something to add there perhaps. I had an interesting discussion last week that the running cost of, let's say, a 40 meter or 15 years old is not necessarily much different from a brand new one of the same length. So why don't go for the new one then? So something needs to happen there.
So the team at Heason, Ralph, you sort of answered the question, but they're quite interested to know a little bit more about the Dutch yachting industry, and perhaps we can talk a little bit about the semi-custom production yachts, which we're seeing particularly popular within the Dutch sector.
What would you like to know? I think, what concerns me a little bit is that there's so much competition now around the 50 meter mark. And it's the Italians have really been going at that. They're now also going at 60 meter. So I think everybody will need to run a little bit harder. Obviously, we recognize that different shipyards deliver different quality. And I think the client will recognize that as well. But I think it's a pretty tough game right now, certainly around the 50 meter mark. And but I think also the last year it was rather slow historically as well. So I would expect things to go up. And the amount of stuff I've heard about new large projects over the past couple of weeks that are all sort of getting close to signing, then I think things ought to pick up on that end again. I think also the larger end of the market has a slightly different rhythm than, let's say, below 50 meter. But clients are taking longer to decide. That is at least what I'm hearing from brokers.
So talking about increase in ownership, we are about to enter into the spring charter season and obviously the spring boat shows. And the SuperYacht Times team is heading to Medes and Nafplion in just a couple of weeks. But that show is getting busier and busier, over 100 yachts attending the event. Why do you think that region particularly is so interesting, and why do you think it's growing?
I think sort of the Greeks are known for their prowess in handling shipping. In shipping, it's the number one shipping nation in the world. And the Greek owners have always had a passion for yachts themselves. They often have at least one or two even, and then one for sort of a jaunt off to a nearby island from Marina Zee or Marina Vlissels on the weekend, and maybe a bigger one for longer trips. And they are really working together as a community to promote charter in Greece. And correct me if I'm wrong, but chartering is also becoming easier now in Greece, regulation-wise. And we've also now seen several enterprising Greek owners who are actually really turning this into a business, the chartering of large yachts. So they're really going at it collectively, and I've also noticed the tremendous increase in participating yachts in Medes over, let's say, the last 4 or 5 years. So I'm absolutely looking forward to check it out over there and hear more from these Greek owners. And I mean, they're always so busy at it and crafty. They do their own refits in Parama. They're not scared by any job. They will make it work. So
and
yeah.
On that note, do you think there are any regions that we're sort of expecting to see as up and coming over the next couple of years?
Well, Middle East we already touched upon. I think still sort of putting together an attractive itinerary there may be a bit of challenge here and there, but you can work around it. Saudi's investing heavily on the Red Sea. That is one way or another that will attract more yachts. And I think Asia continues to come up. It maybe hasn't, they are the biggest, fastest growing region in terms of ultra wealthy people. Many countries don't really have the yachting tradition. That has been the challenge in recent years. At the same time, it is gradually growing, and we see several Asian brokers gradually taking bigger boats there, new boats. And I hope to find out a lot also in Hong Kong, where we're going in early June for a summit. As Hong Kong is now also up and running again after the whole COVID business. Powerhouse of yachting, still taking new boats, big boats. So it ought to keep coming up.
Yeah, and that sort of leads into a very important topic, which is infrastructure. Diego Luca has posted here saying clients are having difficulty finding berths for their yachts and qualified crew. This is a bit of an endless conversation in the sector, but what we are seeing is a huge amount of financial investment from independent bodies and big investment corporations into marina infrastructure, not just in the hotspots of the Mediterranean, but also, and obviously the Caribbean, but also the Middle East, as Ralph has mentioned. There is quite a bit of infrastructure and investment going on in Asia and obviously Australia as well. So this is a challenge that we're going to have to face, and which we are facing continually. And also the additional challenge of, as yachts become more efficient and more sustainable, how will they bunker? Where are they going to be bunkering if they're using, for example, HVO and biofuels? So this is something we'll be keeping a close track on through SuperYacht Times, and of course through our system SYTIQ when it comes to marina infrastructure as well. I think
the berth situation is particularly interesting. I had some conversations over that, and I think we'll try to look into that this year. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, we have now been going for half an hour, so we'd like to say a very big thank you to everyone who's joined in today. And as I mentioned before, we will be posting the link to the State of Yachting 2024 very shortly, so keep an eye on the social media. And Ralph, congratulations for another fantastic report.
Thank you for your help.
Thank you, everyone.